In this lesson, I'd like to show you some of the many different bone tools that you'll soon become very familiar with. So I'm trying to actually show you a whole bunch of useful things in this one video. So if you ever forget how to do something, you can always come back to this lesson and get an easy reminder, rather than trying to scrub through one of the project lessons where you find that exact spot that I did that specific thing. Now, this is just some of the common tools that you'll use, and it is by no means all of the tools that I'm going to show you in this course. There is a handful of things that I've left out of this lesson, but they'll be covered later when it's time to do that. I'd also like to encourage you to have a play around with all the things that I show you in this lesson. Well, that is after you've seen the lesson, of course. Now let's jump into Blender and check out some of the tools you'll use in the Armature's Edit mode. In the Tool tab down here, which you can activate with the T key, at the bottom here, you'll see when we're in Edit mode that we actually have a few tools for rigging. And this first one here is the Roll tool. So when we select it, you actually have to have the body of the bone selected, and then you can just grab it and manipulate your roll setting here, or you can use the keyboard shortcut. So I'll just deselect that tool, which is Control R, and then we can position it like this. So I think you'll find yourself hitting Control R. But when you're a beginner, sometimes it's just easier to use a tool over here because it's easier for you to find rather than trying to remember all the hotkeys at once. So Control R for roll. Now the next one here is the bone size. So we can do the same thing, although with this one, you need to make sure that you are in envelope. So this is another way of changing our size of our envelopes here. So if you select the top one there and then you scale it, you can make it bigger. Now also with this tool, if you hold down the menu option here, you can see the bone envelopes, and then we can actually change the envelope separately to the actually we can't change the head and tail, just the body of the bone. And if we wanted to change the bone size, that's going to change everything uniformly. This is just going to change the top, and this is just going to change the bottom there. But envelope is not something that you'll find yourself using all that often. Most of the time, you actually need more precise control, which means that you'll find yourself using vertex groups rather than these envelope weights. Okay, next one's down here is the extrude. So this is very handy. This is new in 2.8 and above. It's going to go back to octahedral for now. So with this tool selected, we can just grab it and extend the bone parallel to our the bone that we have selected. Often you'll find yourself having a bone at a weird angle like this, and you need to create a new one. And this tool is really great for that. So we can just make sure you select the tail, and then extrude from the tail, and that has the same orientation. So that tool extrudes in a straight line. It's very, very handy. Now to extrude without using this tool, or just deselect something else, just make sure you select the tail of the bone, and then you can hit E, and you can do the same thing. You can see this is actually free on all axes, so I can move it around, which is sometimes what you want, although you can't really control the roll at the same time. You actually have to control that later on with Control R or one of the other tools. Now also with our little extrude tool here, we can hold down our button and then choose extrude to cursor. So what this does, when we have the tail of the bone selected, I can click anywhere and then quickly create a bone. This is really, really handy when you need to create bones fast. Now there is actually a keyboard shortcut way of doing this. So let me just deselect that tool. And now with the tail of the bone active, I can just hold down Control and then click, and wherever my mouse cursor is, it's going to use that same tool. You don't actually need to select it over in the menu here. Now it's important to note, because I am right click select, I'm actually using the Control and left click. If you're using the default setup, it will be Control and right click. And finally down here, we have the shear tool. So I'm going to select the length of the bone here, and then I'm going to shear it. And you can see it's just repositioned it like that. I dare say that you'll never use this tool because it's not as precise as positioning the tail and the head wherever you need them to be. Now, quite often you'll find yourself needing to flip the direction of a bone. You can do that quite easily with Alt F. And what that's done is it's flipped the direction. That is also up here in the armature menu. You see switch direction. One thing to be wary of, when you do this, it needs to disconnect the parent so it can perform that operation. And that's why that relationship line disappeared. So if we flip it over, you need to make sure that you re-parent. So Control P, keep offset. There we go, we fixed our parenting. Now we can duplicate any bone by hitting Shift D on our keyboard, and it also activates the transform tool at the same time, so we can position it in a different location if we want. Or if we just cancel with right click or escape, it's going to jump back to where we started. So that is something that you find yourself doing quite often, just duplicating a bone that's already in the right position, rather than creating a brand new one from the cursor point. And also as a handy tip, when there's bones on top of each other, you can enable the B-bone settings here and scale it up with Control Alt S, and then we can make one bigger than the other. And because I can't actually see through here, I'm going to go over to my object, visibility, change this to be wire, and you can see we now have two bones in the same location, and we can see both of them at the same time. All right, another handy tool is the subdivide tool. So I have a bone here, I can hit W just like in mesh editing, and then I can choose subdivide, and that has created a subdivision. It's divided in half, and we can click over here in the redo panel and actually change the number of settings here. So say if I want 6 cuts, it's going to create 7 bones out of that one. Very, very handy. That setting is also up here in the armature menu. You can see it here, subdivide. We can delete a bone by hitting the X key, and then we can actually choose to delete the bone or dissolve the bone. So deleting the bone will do what you expect. I'll just select these two and show you the dissolve bone, which has a shortcut Control X. And what that's going to do is combine those bones, the ones that you had selected, or the heads and the tails. I'll just undo that. And because I have this tail and this head selected, it's going to dissolve it into the surrounding bone. So let's hit Control X, which is a shortcut, and you see it's now created one large bone out of those 3. So that is how you dissolve a bone. Now let's say you have a gap like this and you want to connect these two here. Select the tail, select the head, and hit F. And what that's going to do is just create a bone between those two locations. This is really handy if it's, say, somewhere over there. So I'll just, I'll just select these two here and hit F. And now we've got that bone that stands between those two. It doesn't connect this one to the newly created bone. It keeps that bone the same. It's just going to create a new bone between those two positions. Now here is an option that you'll find yourself needing to memorize. So up here in the Armature tab, we have our bone settings. This is what I want you to memorize, and that is the shortcut Shift W. And this is where we get the settings for the bone. So we can display wire, turn off or on the deformation. I've never used this one here, the multiply vertex group with the envelope. The inherit rotation, we can enable or disable this, and we can also lock the bone. So as I mentioned a couple of times, when you add a bone, by default, it is set to deform. And you'll find yourself needing to turn these off on quite a lot of bones. So we can do that in a number of different ways. We can select them all and then hit Shift W and then choose deform here. And in our redo panel, you can see it's going to toggle that setting. But what I'd like to do is make sure that we click that and then we change it to be exactly what we want, just to make sure that if one was on, it doesn't turn off, and if one was off, it doesn't turn on, it doesn't flip accidentally. So we want to disable them, just choose that, and now all of those ones no longer have that setting turned on. Another way of doing it is selecting them all and then holding down the Alt key as we click this, and that will enable that for all of the ones that you have selected. So if you select them, you can see they're all now enabled. Or you could use a menu up here, which is a long way of doing it, Armature, Bone Settings, Deform. So there we go, that's changed all of them there. But I reckon you should use the keyboard shortcut, Shift W. One super handy tool is the Align feature. In this example, I have a whole bunch of bones pointing in a different direction. And what if I want them all to be in the same orientation as this guy here? And so up here in our Armature menu, we've got Transform down here and Align Bones. This is where it is in the menu, but I'll show you the shortcut, which is Control-Alt-A. So the way that we use it is we need to select the ones that we want to edit, and then we select the one that we want to copy from last. So this is the one that they're all going to be aligned to. And when we use this tool, the heads of the bone are going to stay in the same position, and it's going to make everything else match. It's only going to match the orientation. That means the kind of the vector that it's pointing on here, as well as the roll. It's not going to change the length. So let's hit Control, Alt, and then A, and you can see that they're all still the same length, but now they're all pointed in the same orientation. That is the Align tool. Let's take a look at snapping bones. So often it's something you need to do to position them, and rather than trying to manually manipulate everything, it's easy just to snap them into the location that you want them. Let's have a look at a few different ways of doing that. So here I have this whole chain selected, and these are all just parented together. And say if I want them to be over here at the head of this bone, actually I'll just enable my octahedral so you can see that the direction that they're pointing. So one thing that we can do is use our snapping tool up here. So by default it's set to increment, and that's not what we want. I'm going to choose vertex, and then we can snap it to the vertex here, which is actually the head of our bone. I'm going to hit G, and then if I hold down Control, it's actually going to enable that snapping. And you can see it's snapped to the wrong location. So one way to fix that is I'm just going to position it close and then try again. I'm going to hit G and then snap it, and there we go. So I've aligned those bones really, really quickly. So by holding down Control, it's the same thing as enabling this one up here. Now, say if I wanted to snap it in the other direction, I can just hit this one and then shift select this guy and bring up my snapping menu with Shift S, and then we can choose from these ones here. And I want to choose the selection to the active bone. Bang! We just moves it into that position. Another thing we can do is snap it to our cursor location just by putting our cursor wherever we want, and then make sure that we have our bone selected, and then hit Shift S and then choose selection to cursor. If you wanted to snap these to the cursor position, use the selection to cursor, we'll choose keep offset. You'll notice that it's snapped to the median point, and that is because we have our pivot setting set to median point. So I'm going to change it to the active element and then undo that. So now our active bone is this one that is highlighted. Let's go to selection to cursor. Oops, selection to cursor, keep offset, and you'll notice that I've snapped that whole chain to that location, all while maintaining the orientation of that chain. Now that's not all for snapping, but it is at the moment. We'll have a look at some of these ones a little bit later on. You'll find yourself using the face and the volume quite a lot when we're dealing with a mesh object to position those bones inside the mesh or on the surface where we want. We'll take a look at that later on. Now that you know how to handle your bones and you've learned some of the bone tools that we'll be using later in the course, it's time to have a little bit of fun and let loose. Test out all the tools. I want you to add an armature, jump into edit mode, add more bones, connect them, unconnect them, reposition them, basically have some fun. Extrude them, snap them, align them, bridge the gap, flip it, turn on and off the rotation, basically go with the flow and try and use the keyboard shortcuts as much as possible. And as an added challenge, you can even add a mesh object and try some of the other snapping options that we didn't quite get to in this lesson, but we will get to in another lesson. So that is snapping to the surface or the volume on a mesh. Remember, you're not trying to create anything practical here. You're just messing about and having some fun with a little bit of free play. We'll actually practice these things for real later on in the course. So go on, have some fun, get your hands dirty.